video game industry generates more revenue than Hollywood. How did the video game industry create $10 billion annually? Let's take a look at where it all started and how it got to where it is today. The year is 1971. Newting releases its first arcade video game. Newting manufactures 1,500 computer space machines. The components are packaged with a 13-inch black and white TV set in a futuristic-looking cabinet. The first arcade video game is released, but the public finds it too difficult to play. The year is 1972. In 1972, Nolan Bushnell leaves Newting. Computer space does not sell well, and Bushnell comes to the conclusion that it is too difficult to play. He realizes that if he can design a simple game, it might be a major draw. He informs Newting, who tells him to go ahead and design a new machine. Bushnell decides that since he is the brains behind video games, he should get a larger share of the profits. When he demands a third of Newting Associates and doesn't get it, he leaves the company. In 1972, Bushnell starts Atari. Bushnell and Dabney decide to start their own company to design video games for other companies to distribute. They originally called their company Saigi, the straight-line configuration of three celestial bodies, but that name is already being used by a roofing company. They then settle on the name Atari, a term for the Japanese game Go, whose meaning is equivalent to check in chess. Pong is born. Bushnell hires Al Alcorn to program games. Since Alcorn is inexperienced, Bushnell has him program a simple video tennis game as an exercise. They call the game Pong for two reasons. First, Pong is the sound the game makes when the ball hits a paddle or on the side of the screen. And second, the name Ping Pong is already copyrighted. Pong breaks down. Bushnell tries selling Pong to established arcade manufacturers. After finding Bally disinterested, Bushnell decides to market the game himself. Pong is test marketed in Indy Caps, a local bar. Within 2 weeks, the test unit breaks down because the coin drop is flooded with quarters. Pong is a success. Fama coming to America. Nintendo test markets its Nintendo Entertainment System in New York. Retailers are so skeptical about video games that Nintendo has to agree to buy back all unpurchased inventory. Armed with a large number of Nintendo-developed original titles and arcade games, the NES is a hit and a limited market release. Russian conquers world with puzzle game. Russian programmer Alex Potnov designs Tetris, a simple but addicting puzzle game that can be played on PCs. The year is 1986. Nintendo releases the NES nationwide. Satisfied by the system's success in New York, Nintendo markets the NES nationwide. The system debuts with Super Mario Bros., an arcade version which becomes an instant hit. Sega releases Nintendo Entertainment System competition. Following the successful American introduction of the NES, Sega releases its Sega Master System in the United States. Atari reintroduces game consoles. Following the success of the Nintendo, Atari Corp. Re-evaluates the popularity of video games and decides to release the 7800 game console. Good Nintendo news. Nintendo outsells its competitors 10-1 in the United States. In Japan, it unveils a disk drive peripheral for the Famicom, along with The Legend of Zelda and golf and soccer games. The year is 1987. New software. Nintendo's hold on the market grows, crowding out Sega and Atari. Atari releases games for the 2600 which are all but ignored by the press, and releases ports for the 7800. Namco's Galaga and Dig Dug, Williams' Robotron 2084, and Joust. Electronic Arts' 1983 basketball game One-on-One Basketball, and Atari's own Asteroids and Centipede that everyone has seen before. Nintendo releases The Legend of Zelda on a cartridge in the United States after deciding not to bring the expensive Famicom disk drive peripheral into the American marketplace. Games such as Kid Icarus and Metroid are released, offering enhanced Nintendo graphics and longer quests. Atari repackages computer as game console. Atari releases the Atari XE game system, which is basically a repackaging its old 800 computer. The XEGS uses cartridges compatible with Atari's dying 8-bit XE computer line and includes two games, Barnyard Blaster and Flight Simulator 2, a light gun, and a detachable keyboard. The unit syncs quickly. Tengen begins as a licensed third-party developer of Nintendo-compatible games. This role ends when Atari Games takes Nintendo to court, claiming that Nintendo has an illegal monopoly on the video game industry, achieved through illegal practices such as fixing prices and using computer chip lockout technology to prohibit unlicensed development of Nintendo software. The year is 1989. Tetris troubles. Tengen acquires the home rights to Tetris and begins selling the extremely popular game. However, it is quickly discovered that Tengen bought the rights from Mirrorsoft, which did not own the rights in the first place. Nintendo quietly acquires the legitimate home rights to Tetris. The Tengen version is removed from the marketplace. Nintendo introduces monochrome Game Boy. Nintendo releases its handheld Game Boy, retailing at $109. The system comes with Tetris, and despite a tiny monochrome screen, it begins to build a historic sales record. A Game Boy version of Super Mario, called Super Mario Land, a Breakout clone, called Alleyway, and a baseball game are quickly released. The NEC releases 16-bit console in America. NEC brings the PC Engine to America and calls it the TurboGrafx 16, retailing for $189. NEC also releases a $400 portable CD player that attaches to the TurboGrafx 16 and plays games that are for the first time stored on compact discs. Sega releases 16-bit Genesis. Sega releases the 16-bit Genesis in the United States after limited success in Japan. The $249 system is packed with a conversion of the arcade game Altered Beast. Early marketing efforts pushed the system as a true arcade experience that's substantially better than previous home game machines. Displays a handheld color console called the Handy Game at the Winter CES. Atari purchases the rights to the Handy Game and releases it as the Lynx, retailing for $149. After publishing a handful of Great Epics games, Atari begins to develop a number of 7800 game conversions and Atari Games arcade ports for the system. More expensive than the Game Boy, the Lynx suffers from a lack of third-party support and is plagued by constant rumors that Atari will stop supporting the system. The year is 1990, a good year for Nintendo. Nintendo releases Super Mario 3, the all-time best-selling video game cartridge. Despite competition from the Genesis and TurboGrafx 16, the Nintendo enjoys its best year. Nintendo of Japan unveils its Super Famicom, a 16-bit system with better audio and 3D graphics than the Genesis and TurboGrafx 16. Super Mario 4, Super Mario World, is offered to Japanese gamers who rush to stores to buy the game. Video game rental dispute. Nintendo and Blockbuster go to court over video game rentals, with Nintendo maintaining that the rentals are destroying its sales. When the courts decide the games can be rented, Nintendo strikes another blow by claiming that Blockbuster illegally copied the copyrighted game instruction manuals. This time the courts side with Nintendo. Neo Geo, SNK, a longtime Nintendo developer and maker of such games as the 3 Ikari Warriors releases, and Crystalis, releases the 24-bit Neo Geo in arcade and home formats. The graphics and sounds crush those of the Genesis and TurboGrafx 16. Sega arcade hits continue to come home. Sega continues to turn out games to trade on its established arcade successes. Afterburner 2, eSWAT, and other Sega arcade hits come home, and Sega secures the Genesis rights to Capcom's largely unknown but amazing platform game Strider, which wins Game of the Year honors at various publications. NEC releases handheld TurboGrafx 16. NEC releases the Turbo Express, retailing for $300, a handheld TurboGrafx 16 with a separately sold TV tuner. This is the first time a portable game machine can play a dedicated console's games. The year is 1993. Panasonic releases 3DO console. Panasonic is the first company to market 3DO, or 3DO hardware. Initial reviews are enthusiastic. The only drawback is the console's $700 price tag. Atari launches Jaguar. Atari decides to bypass the 32-bit generation and go right ahead to 64 bits. The company launches the Jaguar, which Atari proclaims to be the first 64-bit game console due to its 64-bit system bus. Atari stresses the fact that the Jaguar is made in the U.S. by IBM. New systems from Nintendo and Sega. Nintendo and Sega announced their next-generation systems. Nintendo's Project Reality is a 64-bit system developed by Silicon Graphics. Sega's Saturn will be a 32 or 64-bit system. Congress notes video game violence. Incensed by the violence in Mortal Kombat and Night Trap, Senators Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut and Herbert Kohl of Wisconsin launch a Senate investigation into video game violence, threaten to somehow affect a ban on violent games, and eventually soften their demand and concede to an industry-wide rating established. The Entertainment Software Rating Board is established to rate video games. Large, better icons appear on game boxes to let consumers know the recommended age of players for each game and whether the game is violent or risque. Nintendo pushes 16-bit machine. Nintendo releases Super Metroid and begins a push to regain control of the 16-bit market. New Super FX chip games, such as Star Fox, are supposed to aid the company's efforts against Sega in its upcoming 32 or 64-bit machine. Nintendo also releases Donkey Kong Country to a stunned crowd at the trade show, and thus demonstrates that even the slow CPU of the Super Nintendo can compete with the 3DO and Jaguar. Donkey Kong Country is the runaway best-selling game of the year, and Nintendo's sales nearly catch up to Genesis sales. Sega releases 32-bit console. Sega releases the 32X, retailing for $180. A peripheral that enables the Genesis to run a new set of 32-bit cartridge games in an attempt to stave off early sales of the Atari Jaguar and Panasonic 3DO machines. Ports of its arcade polygonal games, Virtual Racing, and Star Wars are received favorably, as is a version of ID Software's Doom. But Sega licensees remain mysteriously uncommitted to the format, and all the Sega games announced for release bear the fingerprints of Sega of America marketing and development efforts. No one seems to know what the company is planning to do with the machine in the future, and Sega seems almost unprepared to release the machine in Japan at all. Nintendo releases Super Game Boy. Nintendo releases the Super Game Boy, retailing for $60, an adapter that lets Game Boy cartridges play on the Super Nintendo with extra features. New Japanese consoles are released. The Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation are launched in Japan. By year's end, critics are pointing to the PlayStation as a superior machine. New Sega console. Although Sega officially acknowledges its new 128-bit system, the system's name continues to be elusive throughout most of the year. Originally codenamed Dural and Black Belt, the system is officially named Katana in early 1998. At the same time, Sega discloses that the new system will use a Microsoft Windows CE operating system, which will mean easier game conversions to and from the PC. The Katana is displayed in May, and one unique aspect of its visual memory system, a memory device that plugs into the controller but can also be used as a standalone game device, with Tamagotchi-like graphics. As the year progresses, Sega announces that the Katana will be released in Japan in November. Although the US won't get the new system until 1999, Sega of America begins making plans to spend $100 million to launch it. By mid-year, Sega announces another name change. This time the system becomes the Dreamcast. With all the hype in place, the Dreamcast finally goes on sale in Japan on November 27th. The initial 150,000 systems that are offered for sale are sold immediately, along with the 132,000 copies of Virtua Fighter 3. Sega's problems continue. Following the canceled merger between Sega and Bandai, Sega president Hayao Nakayama resigns from his position and is replaced by Sega of America chairman Shinichiro Imajiri. Other woes beset the troubled Sega as cuts are made throughout the three American divisions, Sega of America, Sega Soft, and Sega Entertainment. Along with the cuts, Sega announces that it is finally throwing in the towel, and it ceases distribution of the Saturn in North America. The PlayStation 2. Rumors begin early in the year that Sony is hard at work on the PlayStation 2. While Sony is closed-mouthed at first, bits and pieces concerning the new system begin to emerge from independent developers. By mid-year, Sony admits that the new console is indeed in development, and that it may be DVD-based if that is practical. The best guess on when the new system will be available is sometime in 2000. By mid-year, the rumors are in full force, stating that Sony will team up with Toshiba to develop the chipset for the new console. Early predictions indicate that the RISC processor will run at 250 MHz, slightly faster than the processor in Sega's Dreamcast. The year is 2000. PlayStation 2 released in Japan. Sony launches the PlayStation 2 in Japan on March 4th. In 2 days, the company sells 1 million consoles, a new record. As is the case with all Japanese launches, gamers begin lining up outside stores 2 days in advance. Unfortunately, demand exceeds supply and not everybody gets a console, including those who pre-ordered. Robberies of PlayStation 2s are reported.
We interrupt your programming with a message from the State Department. All bridges and some roads in the Vice City metropolitan area have been closed because of a severe weather warning. Meteorologists are tracking Hurricane Hermione, which has devastated 5 Caribbean islands and is heading for Vice City. More updates soon.
Xbox officially announced. The world's worst kept secret becomes public knowledge after the opening of the Game Developers Conference in March. Bill Gates delivers the keynote address and officially announces the Xbox to the world. Gates stresses that the Xbox will not be a PC in a console's clothing. Equipped with an Intel 733 MHz Pentium 3 CPU and NVIDIA NV2A 250 MHz graphics processor, with 64 megabytes of unified RAM, an 8 gigabyte hard drive, and out-of-the-box broadband internet support, the Xbox sends a strong signal to Sony that it intends to be a major player. November 22nd, Xbox releases its next console, the Xbox 360. It quickly sells out in a matter of hours.
First floor is clear! Heads up! Sniper! Vasily, grab that sniper rifle. Good. Now wait for Pavel to get that bastard's attention. Pavel, do it. Yes, comrade. Front floor, left building. He's dead. Good shot, comrade. Well done, Vasily. Now let's move on. We still have to secure the rest of City Hall. First and 10. Ball to 21. Single back formation. On the carry. He fakes the give. Passes it out to the left. Snags it out of the air. Inside the 10. Brings it in for the score. Longwell comes in with the extra point. And he tacks on the extra. The back open the
PlayStation 3 and the Nintendo Revolution, the new systems from Nintendo and Sony, will be released in 2006.